Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, we give our shout-outs. Laura and I discuss the future of big data in science. We sit down with Dr. Laura Lopez-Hoffman and Dr. Lien to talk about the NEPAccess program they are running out of the University of Arizona. If you're a NEPA practitioner or just interested in NEPA in general, it is a must listen. And finally, we all know that Sahara is the largest desert in the world, but let's put it in perspective. It's the same size as the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. But to put it in a different way, it's about 44,000 football fields long or 1.5 million camels long. Who knew?
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's just, I can't believe it. The scale is, it's 1,000 miles wide too. So it's not just long. It's crazy. Yeah,
I believe it. Having flown over it and looked out the window and seen it and then sat down, looked out the window an hour or two later again and still see it. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's so wild. And I'm super jealous you've done that. So please be sure, as always, to subscribe, rate, and review. Hit that music.
Our shout out for today goes to TBAEP and the committee that leads it. This is our 6th annual Women in STEM workshop, and every year it's sold out. It always has great leaders at the tables, so be sure to get your tickets for that. It's happening in September. And we know a lot of our listeners are new to the profession, so don't forget to check out the NAEP job board at naep-jobs.careerwebsite.com for new and exciting opportunities in the environmental field.
Because I love
Nic and I love doing this show. If you love it too and would like to keep us doing it, we need your help. We can't do it without our awesome sponsors. So please head on over to environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out the sponsor form for details. Now let's get to our segment.
Sweet. But yeah, so we gotta talk big data. I mean, let's talk about it. Let's talk big data.
Let's talk about it. Big data.
Big data. It's just a fun word to say.
So big data, is that like Internet of Things, or is that what's the other word? There's another word for big data.
Oh, I'm sure there's more. But now you've caught us, Laura. You've caught us. We only know so much. No, big data is really interesting. It's one of those things that I don't think anybody ever really thinks about, because you just don't ever. It's in everyday life, right? Like even how you search your emails is big data. Like when you type in a search engine and it tries to find the words, that's some kind of big data. But what we talked about with Laura and Aaron was like a step beyond that, right? Like I think you were mentioning that Google has started telling you the tone of your emails, which is just fantastic in lots of different ways.
Well, Dr. Laura pointed out that it's not just a database; it's a knowledge and engagement program.
Right?
Calling it just a database. And you say a database, like, oh, it's a repository. That's just where data lives. But, data in itself is coming to life in other ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And even trying to understand, tone of an email is one of the hardest things in the world to do. And it seems easy, but we screw it up all the time, just as individuals. You're like, what is this really rude, mean, snarky, and then you talk to the person and they're like, oh, no, it's just answered it quickly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be. Right? Like that happens all the time. And you're asking.
I actually love that feature.
Yeah. Where
it's kind of, because I go, it makes me rethink.
Right.
Like, oh, I didn't say, I was just very direct and to the point. I need to add some thank you and I appreciate you or whatever. And then it automatically goes, ding, thumbs up, good job. And I'm like, all right, cool.
You're not a total jerk. Yeah.
Right.
That's fun. But
so that comes from big data, huh?
That's all big data. Yeah, for sure. And, because how else do you, but just thinking about that process, right? How do you get a computer to say, hey, Laura's being a jerk, tell Laura to stop being a jerk. That seems easy, but default. Then it's like, okay, is it short words? Is it short content? Is it the actual words themselves? And you have to have an algorithm that determines that, right? Like we talked about on the show, sarcasm is impossible. It's one of the hardest things in the world for big data to understand. And you just total side note, I feel like big data we're talking about they're watching us all the time. Big data, big data's out there. Big data's going to get us, but maybe that's true actually in some ways. I I do love that. It's
I do. I think soon there's going to be an app that tells me and you if we're being high enough energy or we're smiling enough or
right.
The podcast.
Yeah, you're not laughing enough.
Algorithm that checks with the big data to tell if we're compared to other podcasts if we're on point or not.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like big data it's everywhere. It is actually in like learning that speech learning, right? Where you like talk to text is a thing that is a data-driven application. And it gets better. It has to listen to your voice to really get the baseline for it. And it's still not perfect. My wife does it every now and then. Some of the texts are hilarious. I'm like, yeah, like she'll say kiwi and pick up some kiwis and it comes out like pick up some wee-wees. I'm like, okay, all right, I can't do that. Let's not do that. So it's not perfect, but that's where we're going with it. And I think that's pretty neat.
Well, you said that big data doesn't understand sarcasm, or let's just say that programming and AI don't understand sarcasm yet, but I really feel that autocorrect knows all about sarcasm.
Yeah, that's true. That is absolutely true. It is. It's like, oh wow, the autocorrect is funnier than I am. That's hurtful.
That's on purpose.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's got to sting. But yeah, I honestly think that they're going to get there, though. That's the thing that's really crazy. Like it's getting, but it gets better all the time. You can think about how the beginning of voice to text was hilarious, and now we're at a much better spot. And even having that idea that it has to listen to your voice first is a new thing. Well, not new anymore, but that was like, oh yeah, this will help make this process better. So yeah, it's in everything. I'm trying to think like even like pulling up searches like what will this person like. And so a lot of what the data is doing now is going straight to what you specifically like, your own personal algorithm. We all have one. And you could just go to Google News and scroll through it and see what it pops up with, and some of it will be big news, but I'm sure, Laura, yours and mine are a little different. I don't think you have any NFL preseason stuff coming up on yours.
Gosh, I hope not. I know people will complain about like, oh, the bots are listening. And then they show it, like you talk about something, they show it to you. I'm like, man, that's freaking convenient.
I know. Well, it does get scary sometimes. I remember like I told my wife, I'm like, man, my ears are ringing. Like I just got this ringing in my ear. It's really annoying. And she's scrolling through her phone and like an ad for tinnitus, like tinnitus therapy shows up. And you're like, okay, that's, they are listening. It is crazy, but that's what they're trying to do. It's like, oh yeah. So ringing in your ears, try this,
Timely,
Yeah, quite timely. But it is a little freaky too. There's a little bit about it that makes me nervous, but I mean, we're here already. It's already here.
Oh, we're here already, and it's beyond what we're even talking about.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. You have it.
Have you read Hit Refresh by Satya Nadella, the CEO for Microsoft?
No, but tell me about it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I love the way he talks about leadership and all of that. But also I really loved, he talked about like some of the things they're working on. Yeah. And, one of the future challenges, and it crosses over with environmental, is the storage of all this data, right? So it's not, the cloud is it's kind of like fiber optics. The cloud is virtual, but there's a real footprint that's associated with it. And so the next big challenge, the hurdle is like when you start, like, I don't know if you've ever been into a server room or know about like networks, but they have to be air conditioned because they generate heat, right? So the challenge is when you have that much storage of data is how do you keep it cool? And then so also keeping it cool actually can help the batteries be smaller. So, there are lots of companies working on how do we create. So, how we already get so much like our phones now have way more than the first IBM computer.
Yeah, right.
Like storage. They're working on nanotechnologies, which will like once they unlock that, then we're not even talking about big data. We're talking about I don't know. It's almost, that's creepy. Because we're going to be talking about, they'll be able to, map genomes and DNA sequences in a matter of seconds. And, things so there's like a next level of big data that's just on the verge of somebody figuring out data storage,
And like, the quantum computer and everything, See, this is the stuff that comes up in my feed. It's talking about like Microsoft's, or is it Microsoft or Google? Their time crystals that they actually say they created. I can't remember which one of them did it, but that kind of stuff is just mind blowing. Trying to read about it, even with a science background, sometimes you're like, what? It is quite complicated, but really, really fascinating. Actually,
it's exciting and scaring and Terminator all at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I had a project actually where we went to a secure facility and they actually had that server room, and the way they kept it cool was actually with cold water, which was crazy, which was weird. Like, and it sounds like, why would you put water and electronics next to each other? Very bad idea. And generally, yes, but like they weren't like next to each other. They were just in the same room. And so it was just a way that they could keep things cool. You could basically route the water wherever it needs to go to dissipate heat. And as long as you put it behind a different, I think at this point it was glass or something like that. And it was, separate from the actual servers themselves. But that's the challenge with Bitcoin, right? All the cryptocurrencies is the storage of all of this data. You can't just, like you said, it has to go somewhere. And its carbon footprint, not great.
Right. And I actually love that the last crash was sort of associated with that, and the fact that people were like, wait a minute, this is not sustainable. And now the ones that are coming out of that are the sustainable companies, the ones who've said they're net zero or net negative, which is really cool.
Yeah. And, technology, it's one of those things that, technology is driven by, consumer demand a lot of times, and when people say things like, I want this to be efficient, I need it to be better, competition does that as well. It's actually probably more important where it's like, if they are doing this, then we have to do it so that we don't get behind. And if we can do it better than them, then more people will come to us. It's the electric cars. That's why you see that come up, is because Tesla was like, we're doing this. And everyone else is like, this is dumb. And then they realize people want it. And now, bam. And so hopefully the same thing happens with big data too. So they get better at storing that data.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's hear from our guests who are going to talk to us about some real life current big data application in the environmental space.
Cool. Welcome back to EPR. Today we have a very special treat for you. We have two guests, Dr. Laura Lopez-Hoffman and Dr. Lien, who are both professors from the University of Arizona. They are working on the development of an online NEPA database called NEPAccess, and we're really excited to have them here. Thank you guys for being on the show.
Thanks.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. So we always start with the basics on our interviews, right? So I want to know, what prompted your interest in environmental science and how did you get to where you are today? Laura, we'll start with you.
Well, actually, it goes back a long ways. Grandfathers, great-grandfathers, ecologists, founders of the Ecological Society of America. So it's sort of in my family. Yep.
Oh, wow.
On my stepfather's side. So it was just clear what I was going to do.
That's cool. Aaron?
Yeah, I'm a first-generation college student in my family, but I grew up outside of Seattle, small town outside of Seattle, mountain climbing, backpacking, just, spent my whole youth outdoors, and that kind of got me interested in conservation and natural resources management. And I've been doing it my entire career.
Nice. Awesome. So we have a lot of listeners that are new to the environmental world. So students and even some career changers. And a lot of what you do seems to sort of bridge the gap between the commercial work industry and academia, which is awesome. Have you noticed that this is kind of a shift that's happening? There's a little bit more collaboration between the industries and the universities.
Yeah, well, I would say that certainly, from our perspective at the universities, we see a lot more encouragement from the university administration, but also in our work and what we're trying to do to work with stakeholders, work with industry partners, work with local communities and communities beyond, Tucson, to engage them in our research, because we want the work that we do to make a difference. We're not just sitting here in our offices doing research for our own edification, our own benefit. We want to see what we're doing, hopefully make a difference in the world. And that's really a big part of why we're doing this work with NEPA. So yeah, I think it's becoming more and more common for folks in the academic world to be engaging outside of academia.
Great. Yeah, I think that's really great to see. It's awesome that you have a really good dedication to mentorship of women and minorities and first generation students. That's really awesome. Do you have advice for our listeners about how to incorporate diversity into their programs, or things that you have found to work really well?
That's an interesting question. It's a very good question. So advice to somebody who wants to have a more diverse team.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously, a diverse team is really important because you have people coming from all different backgrounds with all different perspectives. And I know that people say that, but it's actually true.
Yeah.
I, over the years, have worked with so many people from such different backgrounds. And that's what this project is about, really working with all sorts of different backgrounds. And so one of the things that I really most love is a student who came from a background different from mine because I have family members in this field for years, but getting them excited in like somebody who has a real interest, but they never kind of had the way to do it. And so the biggest thing that I say to people starting off is it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. Your first step doesn't have to be perfect, and don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And so that's my main kind of advice for people from different backgrounds. In terms of putting a team together, just put a team together and, support people and give them a chance to go. And then they go.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that. I love bringing in young people from all different spaces and just, I like to push them to the edge of the ledge and then say, okay,
all right,
now you're up.
Now you got to fly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. 100%. And Laura, you run a lab that endeavors to use science to inform environmental governance and policy, which is it's really cool. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff that you guys are going to hear on the show today. So how have you seen data science impact policy?
So thank you for that question. I think that gets at the heart of what we're trying to do. So we're very interested in NEPA. And what we're doing is we're using cutting edge data science to try to do two things. One is to understand how well NEPA has worked over the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is to figure out ways for making NEPA work more smoothly and efficiently moving forward. And so data science is really important. You mentioned that we're working on the NEPAccess database. And actually, we call it, maybe sounds like a nerdy term, but we call it a knowledge discovery and engagement platform. Hey. Knowledge sort of being the database part, right? So you can go there and you can get knowledge from it. But the discovery and engagement go way beyond what somebody would normally think of as a database. So we really envision it as a one-stop shop for all things NEPA, where you can go and you can get data. So you can get knowledge, but you can also sort of discover new things. So we're building these cool algorithms that help you kind of look at NEPA and get data from NEPA or look at NEPA processes in new and different ways. So discover new things about how NEPA has worked that nobody would have ever thought possible. For example, you might be able to look across the entire country for one kind of action and connect it, even though you're crossing agencies. And so discovering new things about it. And then engagement is a super easy one-stop shop for people across the country of all sorts, from the local person who's worried about a project in their backyard to an environmental professional. And so we're really excited. And stuff like this wouldn't be possible without data science.
Yeah, it is. It is really, really cool stuff.
And Erin, you're an environmental social scientist with a focus on solving environmental governance challenges. There's been a strong element of understanding human behavior and decision-making in your work. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in how policy interfaces with people's attitudes and beliefs and preferences for natural resources management, or how we use natural resources, how we're managing forests and rangelands and other spaces. And so I kind of approach things from, doing kind of interview work and survey work, from working with, people to understand what they think about things, and then to look at the policy structures and see how those things interface with one another, because policy influences what people think, and what people think influences policy, right? So this is a two-way street. And if we look at things just from one direction, we probably miss some of the connections there and some of the things that are driving outcomes. But the other thing that I do in my work, and that Laura and I do working together, is we also think about things from both the social side and the kind of ecological or environmental science side of things. So we don't only need to look at kind of like how policy structures work and how people think about things, but also how the environment responds to people's preferences and to our management actions, and vice versa. And so we need to think of these things as connected systems. And that's a big part of what NEPA really does. So NEPA was way ahead of its time, because it's written in the preamble to the law that this is about people's influence on the environment and our place in the world, right? And so understanding humans' impacts on the natural environment and looking at it as a holistic thing. And that's what NEPA is all about. So by improving access to NEPA documents, access to the NEPA process, we can really help people, we think, Laura and I think, that improving the outcomes that we see on the ground through this right now maybe somewhat confusing or opaque NEPA process that we hope to make it more accessible to people.
Right.
Yeah. And it's a great segue to diving into NEPAccess. And it's a really cool program because it's literally where Laura and I meet on the environmental spectrum. We're solving NEPA issues with big data, which is it's an amazing thing. So you've developed this, it's a tool that helps you search through NEPA documents. And I believe all the EIS is published since 2012, which as a NEPA nerd is just great. Like it really is so cool to rummage around in it. And I couldn't help but be impressed by the scope and scale of this project. So, like you said, you can search by industry, location, client, even your own name, which is, I'm not saying I did it. I'm just saying it's possible to do it. Can you walk us through what the project is, what each of your roles are, and what your goals are for it? Dr. Laura?
Yeah. So actually now, I think since you last looked at it, we have almost 80% of all EISs since 2002.
Wow.
I believe.
Yeah.
So we're moving fast. So walking through it, just like taking the knowledge discovery and engagement framework. So the knowledge is we're trying to collect all EISs from 87 forward. And we have pretty good coverage now from 2002 forward. And then making those available in one place, I think is huge, makes it simple for people to find stuff. Right now, the EPA has a lot of stuff, but then there's stuff on different agency websites. So we're trying to collect it all in one spot. And then we're processing each of the documents so that it's full text searchable. So it's a bit of an advantage in the past because things weren't necessarily full text search where you could go into the document and search any word. The other thing that we're doing now that we hope to have by the end of the year is a little bit more comprehensive metadata than is in the EPA site. Mm-hmm. So for example, one of the things that a lot of people want to know is, not just the state, but who are the lead and cooperating agencies, and that's not in the EPA's metadata. And so we're extracting that right now. And so that's basically what we hope to have by the end of the year is pretty good coverage from 87 on. I don't know if we can make it by the end of this calendar year, but we hope soon. And then a little bit more metadata and sort of a good coverage. Moving forward, we want to have other kinds of NEPA documents, and then more sophisticated stuff that allow you to get into that next part, which is the discovery and then the engagement. So the discovery is, what some of the data science challenges, and if I'm going too long,
no,
you guys,
no.
Okay.
Yeah,
so one of the challenges is turning text into data. And so that's a huge field of data science called natural language processing, where you understand how people write and talk in natural language and you turn that into data. And so it's actually pretty hard to do. And a lot of work has been done, say, like on movie reviews to turn, what somebody says about a restaurant on Yelp or a movie review. And those are often short documents. And so one of the really cool cutting edge things about this project, even for the field of natural language processing, is they're not used to working with such long documents. So that's like, we're pushing the envelope of data science by doing this project, which is, I think, really cool.
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, that's, I'm almost overwhelmed. So is that why this process is hard? Is it because the data is overwhelming? Is that what?
Yeah. So the first problem that we had was that there wasn't a single repository of data. And so we've been collecting that. We've had students for the last year scraping every nook and cranny on the web to try to find where anything is. The second challenge is that turning text into data is a challenge. The third challenge is that it's so long. The fourth challenge is that EISs aren't necessarily done in the same order. So like they have to have standard information, but it's not in the same order. So you have to train a machine how to find something. And so our data science, our natural language process expert, Stephen Bethard, he had this great analogy, like you usually expect the bathroom in a house to be near the bedrooms or sometimes sort of off the living room, but sometimes somebody puts it like in the garage. You have to have a machine that can go through 10,000 houses really fast and figure out where the bathroom is. And so that's the next challenge, because we would like people to be able to do this discovery part, which is to zoom in and be like, I just want to find this sort of section. I want to find the preferred alternatives section, and I want to be able to compare that across agencies for one certain kind of action and like look at how that's changed over time. And we can do that for you, but we first have to find that preferred alternative section. So that's the next challenge. And then the other challenge is we also, in terms of engagement, we want to be able to go in and from documents sort of extract how much engagement there was, what kind of people engaged, and then even the comments, like what they had to say about it. And so, again, going back to the movie reviews, you either like a movie or you hate it, and you're pretty clear about it, right?
Right.
So in a comment on an EIS, somebody might say something like, that mountain is just a pile of rocks. Mining is our hope and future. That sounds like a very positive comment. And somebody else might say, that mountain is more than a pile of rocks. It's our hope and future. And so your data science algorithms for movie reviews would pick those both up as positive comments, and yet they're saying the opposite. Yeah. And so that's another part of super challenging data science. It's called sentiment analysis, and it's really exciting. And we have some students who've been working on that. Nothing yet to share, but to distinguish between those two is super sophisticated.
Yeah. And it's something that seems really obvious and easy. It's like trying to teach sarcasm, though, is one of the hardest things to do, right? Because the words seem good, but they're not. And that's a really hard challenge. Yeah,
exactly. Reminds me of my Google email will now tell me what the tone is of my email before I send it. So seems similar to that.
So that's exactly what Google is using. It's called sentiment analysis. And we're going to try to do it on, on like EIS comments.
That's cool.
That is cool. Wow. So Erin, in your role in this process, are you doing more of the data side of things, or are you doing something different?
I'm not a data scientist, so I'm not doing the natural language processing or the database development sort of work and all of that. As a social scientist and policy expert, I'm kind of bringing that expertise to the project to understand how the NEPA process works and think through how stakeholders of different types might engage with the tools. So what do they actually need to do the things that, would be helpful for engaging in the NEPA process? And so you can think about things like, we're working on some tools to be able to map EISs and put them on a landscape. And so, an EIS might say, well, this project takes place in Pima County, Arizona. Well, Pima County, Arizona is about the size of Connecticut and Rhode Island, right? So that's not that useful. So to make that useful, you need to be able to drill down further. And so figuring out those things that make these tools really useful for people that are engaging in the NEPA process, either consultants or the general public or NGOs, federal agencies. So that's kind of my role in this project, is as we start developing these tools, thinking through what we really need to do to make them useful tools and not just tools that are there.
Right. Yeah, it's always a pretty important part of the process. And, it's just, I can't help but wonder, like, what actually prompted your interest developing the NEPAccess? Like, what was it about environmental policy that drew you to it?
So I'll take that one. So I'm an environmental scientist. Erin's an environmental social scientist. So we're slightly different. And so I'm used to looking at change on landscapes and thinking about what's happened in the past and what might happen in the future. And, I was always aware of NEPA as a super big trove of information. When I started at the U of A as a very junior person, I started working with the dean of the law school. And I was really shocked, as somebody who likes to work with data sets and big data sets, that there wasn't even a single repository of NEPA documents. Right. So as an environmental scientist who likes to work with data, I'm not a computer scientist, I'm not a data scientist, but I'm an environmental scientist. I was sort of shocked that this major statute, which really has a lot of influence on our environment, had no data behind it. And so no data to, you couldn't get the data out of it. And some of that data in it, like some of the water quality reports that the consulting companies do, that you can't find that data anywhere else. So that was a shock to me. And then it was also a shock that you couldn't really just track across projects and sort of look at NEPA as a process. So it just sort of got my nerdy side, the data aspect of it just sort of piqued my nerdy side a little bit. I mean, I already knew it was a super important statute. The nerdy side of me came out.
And I can just add a little bit to that from the policy side, from a policy scientist or a social scientist perspective. NEPA is the cornerstone law of U.S. environmental policy. And it's been mimicked by most states. Most states have their own kind of version of NEPA that they use, and some are more rigorous than others, but there is something there in terms of environmental review in most states. And then many other countries have mimicked NEPA as well. But as it stands now, we have very, very little information on what NEPA actually does in terms of efficacy. And, does it improve environmental outcomes? If it does, in what ways? So is it effective? How do we make it more effective? How do we analyze the outcomes of NEPA? This is information we don't have. And part of the reason we don't have it is because it's just so hard to do, because all of these NEPA documents are scattered around in different agencies, not compiled. There's no systematic way of analyzing them. They're all very long. So if you do want to do an analysis, right now, an analysis in the published literature of 20 EISs is a really big data set. But that's a really tiny data set if you're looking for systematic knowledge, right? So that's another core challenge. That's part of why I'm so interested in this work.
Yeah. And this whole thing is really, really, I can't oversell how impressive it is, but I don't want it to go to your heads, but I do want to hear a little bit more about what you guys think we'll be able to do with NEPAccess that we really couldn't do before.
Yeah. So no, it's not going to go to our heads. Thank you for being careful of that. Just because it's a pretty hard problem. So we actually get a lot of suggestions from folks. Could you do this or could you do that? And we've often thought about that already, but it's not as easy as people may think. Just trying to get some more sophisticated metadata is really tricky. So a really obvious thing is, you'd like to know who the lead and cooperating agencies are. And we have to sort of extract the cooperating agencies. We'd also like to know what kind of action it is. There's nobody who's checking and saying, here's sort of 20 different kinds of, typical actions and what does this EIS represent? That's really useful knowledge, and we're trying to do it. And I should just say that when you build an algorithm, you actually have to give the machine something that's true. And then it starts to use machine learning to come up with an algorithm that, you can use what's true on this known data set, and then you can compare it to unknown things. But how do you give it that true thing? You have to do it yourself by hand in person. So we have a small army of undergrads. And Laura was mentioning that earlier, the mentoring, and they are like super excited. We have a bunch of undergrad NEPA nerds at the University of Arizona, like you wouldn't believe, who will spend hours and hours trolling through these things to try to figure this out so that the machine learning can go and do these more sophisticated things. So in the future, we would like it to be able to, we're using something called a network analysis. So it's just all sorts of different kinds of connections. So we want people to discover connections that they may not have even thought of, or to be able to compare, one kind of action across the country over the years and see how the analysis changed and the alternatives that people were considering, maybe changed over the years. We want people to be able to look up their own names and see who worked together on different EISs, or to look and see what kinds of groups are commenting, and if that changes from agency to agency or over the years. All sorts of kinds of connections about how NEPA is working and how people are engaging in it that you would never have imagined. And then we'd like it to be, we'd like to help fulfill the vision of a very science-based, but also a kind of a dialogue between the government and the public about the environment. So we hope that some of our tools will make it easier for the public to engage in NEPA. If the public knows that there's one place where they can find information and perhaps one place where they can engage in NEPA and make comments, make it easier for the public to do research about similar projects of interest and reach out to other interest groups. An easy place for people to comment. And then, if we can get our algorithms like Laura was talking about earlier, going well, then agencies can get really quick feedback about what people are thinking and what the major concerns are. So we really do hope that it's a one-stop shop and that it's more than just knowledge, but it's really like, let's discover new things. Let's figure out how to do things better, faster, quicker, more efficiently, and with a more engaged approach.
That's awesome.
I'm speechless.
How big is your team?
So right now we have, at any given time over the last 3 years, we've had about 20 people. I'd say we've always had about 5 to 7 undergraduates working on this, and we're just super proud of them, and they are the backbone of our work. We have 2 lead data scientists and then a number of other data scientists working on this. And I just want to give a shout out to our data science team. because we have top-notch people. I mean, people who have worked for the defense, in defense applications. The mapping is useful in defense applications. And we've got Sudaram, one of our lead scientists, has worked a lot with business, with really high-powered companies doing business applications. And then Stephen Bethard, our natural language processing person, has worked with defense-related applications. And obviously, we can't compete to the kind of funding that they could get from, from business or from defense. But they're doing this because they've gotten excited about NEPA and they care about the environment and they care about people being engaged. And so we're super lucky to have people who could be doing something else in industry, who are willing to stay in academia and to work on this problem.
That's fantastic. I'm also a career coach, and I just co-authored with one of my students who works with me an article about how to fill a policy and regulation gap. And so now I have another resource to send them to. And you're doing it. This is how you fill your gaps. Get involved in projects like these. So that's really cool. I imagine most of the feedback you've been getting is really supportive. Have you gotten anything that has kind of surprised you?
Well, we are working really hard, as Erin was talking about, to make it user-friendly. And so you can go to the platform right now and register to log in. So it's NEPAccess, NEPAccess.org. And you can ask to register, and then we'll send you a login. And we just ask that you give us feedback. And so we have been getting feedback that, some things just don't make sense, or it's not easy to use, or people aren't finding immediately what they want. One of the things that we've been having trouble with is people have been looking for EISs from the 90s. And even though it says on the website we have really good coverage from 2002, they somehow miss it. Yeah. And so that's a common kind of concern that we've been having from people. And, it's hard there's just certain things about a website that, as a developer, you don't know what somebody else will stumble on. So we have a really good user experience person. Erin's working kind of at the high level to make sure it's useful for people, but we have a team that is working specifically, does this button here make sense on the side? And if not, how could I change the label so that it, the word record may mean one thing to somebody. And so that's the basic feedback it's just people like it, but we just want to make it super easy and intuitive to use.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, it really is. And I wanted to ask, so it's a really ambitious project. So that means it has to be hugely collaborative. But I'm wondering, do you have any challenges going forward that you'd like to talk through?
Yeah, it is hugely collaborative. As we mentioned, we have everybody on the team, from lawyers to natural scientists to social scientists and data scientists. Our biggest challenge moving forward is mapping. We want to be able to take those EISs from the past and then also figure out how to move forward and map where the impacts are and sort of make ecological footprints. One of the nice things about NEPA is the cumulative impacts assessment, and yet that's almost impossible to do to date with the sort of existing technology.
Yes.
And so that mapping is really, really important. And it's not just mapping, it's how sophisticated do you want it to be? Do you want just a sort of a polygon on a map, or do you want to be able to come back and say, here's the polygon for this kind of impact to this degree? It's a separate, different polygon. That's the water impact. Here's the bird population impact. And so to make all of those polygons, I think that's our biggest technical challenge. Erin, I know that you agree with me.
Sorry, I'm just waiting for the fighter jets to stop flying over my house. But yeah, I totally agree. The mapping is our kind of current, I think, the big technical challenge that we're working on. And it, in addition to some of the things Laura was saying about, what we actually hope to do with the mapping and cumulative effects and things, just to talk a little bit about the challenge and why it is so hard. EISs can mention lots of different places depending on what they're about, right? And so we need to be able to differentiate between the places where a given project is taking place versus, if it's referring to another project in a different place or bringing in data from another place. And so that's not where this project is. And we need to be able to find a way to do that easily with the computer, because we can't just sit and read every EIS, right? And figure out where to map these. And so those sorts of challenges is what we're trying to figure out with machine learning and natural language processing, to be able to map these so we really can get at some of these big cumulative effects questions. And then also going forward with EISs in terms of, the discovery element of this and engaging stakeholders, helping communities engage in the NEPA process. So when NEPA processes are ongoing, they can see where the expected impacts are and think about how they might engage in public comments based on those geographic impacts.
Yeah.
Great. So this is a huge, huge project, and I think it's going to be incredibly valuable. How are you funded for the project? Are you funded for the project? Are you continuing to get funds? How's that working?
Thank you for asking. So we had an original startup research grant from the National Science Foundation to do this work. And, the National Science Foundation is really interested in improving cyber infrastructure and data science infrastructure. And so we've created a basic infrastructure that can help answer a lot of questions about the environment in the US. There's still a lot of work to do. So one of the exciting things is, the example I mentioned earlier about hydrology, about how making that data about water quality available would be super helpful.
Yeah.
And that's something that, would really help a lot of fields from hydrology to conservation biology to public health. And so we do hope to, maybe convince the NSF, National Science Foundation, and NIH to give us more funds. So we'll be applying for more funds from them. But we're also looking for private foundations and donors, and even partnering with and collaborating with private industry as well. So we're definitely in a new phase of looking for funding. We've close to completing our first round of funding, and we're happy with what we've produced, but we're really excited. We've got a lot of ideas for moving forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with your next phase. So what is next for you?
So next phase is just completing off the platform that we have now, trying to get as many documents going back to 87 as we can. And then just having a little bit more metadata like lead and cooperating agency and type of action. And then starting to look for new opportunities and new collaborations so we can keep this going.
Yeah. Oh man. Like I say, I'm very rarely speechless, but you can hear me struggling here. It's really cool. It's a really, really neat thing, a really neat program. And I'm really, really excited to see it implemented and then where it goes. Like both of those things are exciting for me. So I want to thank both of you for being here. We're really close to time, but I don't want to let you go without asking you if there's anything else you'd like to mention about the project or anything else you're doing before you go.
Just to thank you guys. I mean, we are, your NAEP is one of our main user groups. And so that you think that what we're doing is useful, Nic, just keeps us going for another couple months. Maybe, in 2 months, you could tell us again, but it's just really helpful. It's really helpful to know that folks out there, the professionals in the field, see the value in what we're doing. So thank you very much for having us on today and for being excited about this as much as we are.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
And Laura, thank you as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both for being here. I think this is an excellent project. You have a lot of tasks on your hands, but I think it sounds like you've got a qualified team and you're more than qualified to lead this project. So I think it's a noble endeavor and you're going to do a lot. Just having that historical data that you can search through, it elevates everything everyone does going forward. So I think it's really great. So thank you just so much for being here and sharing with us today.
Thank you. Thank you guys both.
That's our show. Thank you, Laura and Aaron, for joining us today and sharing more about your project. It sounds really cool. Can't wait to see how it comes out and changes things for the better. So please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. And also don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Catch you next time.
See you, everybody.